So what I want to talk about is a little bit of an extension of what Don was talking about, which is around how we can measure supervision effects in community corrections. So you would have seen, obviously Boxer have done some really good work in this space, but as Don said, Boxer have, like everyone else, limited resources and a lot of demands. So we need to look at, well, how can we do this ourselves? So we've got a lot of information within our own databases, so we don't have the capacity for measuring things that Boxer can do, like rates of rearrest, but we do have lots of information on how many people are coming into prison, coming back on community-based orders, that sort of thing. So I just want to give you a quick sort of picture of how we can do that within sort of our own resources. So a key part of our business is around reducing reoffending. I mean, that's what we've been talking about for the last little while. That's why we're all here. It's around reducing the impact on the community. We can measure that numerous different ways, but our focus for this purpose is going to be around return to custody. One of the advantages of looking at return to custody is we tend to pick up the more serious ones. So as I said before, there's about 110,000 criminal matters, most result in fines. If you've got an armed robber or a murderer that commits a minor traffic offence and gets a fine, strictly speaking that's a reoffending, but we don't really care so much about those ones. So the idea is we use return to custody as a sort of an indicator of the more high impact crime. Okay, so what does this look like? So this is the New South Wales data for rate of return. So this is offenders released from custody, returning to custody, and it's over a 2-year period. And what that curve shows, it's a survival curve, which basically shows at the top you've got everyone in the community, and then over time offenders start to return. So that line is showing you how many people are left in the community, and as you can see over time the line drops, and you end up after a 2-year period at about 50%. Now there's a number of different ways you can cut this. I've just looked at offenders coming back into cells. So you could, for example, look at offenders coming back on sentence or various other measures. Now the problem with this, as Don alluded to, is not every offender is the same. Okay, so we could have a change in reoffending rates that actually aren't about making a difference. So if we look at the split by risk rating, so this is based on calculated LSI-R scores over the same period. So it's the same data, but it's showing you that within that single line, we've got very, very different patterns. So if you look at the low risk line across the top, they barely, well, they don't even make 10%. Most of them are staying out in the community. You look at our high risk group, they're plummeting. Okay, so that's really important. So what happens if we start getting a whole heap more low risk offenders? Well, our average will start looking more like the low risk curve. If we start getting a lot more high risk offenders, it'll start looking more like the bottom. So mixed population, the change in the overall reoffending rate could just be due to changes in profile. So one example that I can give you of that is if we, in our pre-sentence reports, start saying we don't want low-risk offenders on supervision, we want all the high-risk ones, then of those 20% that we get from the courts, maybe it reduces to 19% because we filter out all the ones that we don't really want. Well, our reoffending rates will go up because we've increased the proportion of high-risk offenders. So how do we control for that? How do we know if we're actually doing something to reduce reoffending? So very much like what Don was talking about, we've got a whole bunch of data that we can use to do propensity matching type exercises ourselves. So things like age, gender, ATSI, order type, LSI-R score. And what I've done is taken everyone that was released, I'm trying to remember what the time period was now. I think it was 2013 into 2014 because I only did it over a 12-month. So yeah, about 13, 14, but the total population was about 23,894 offenders over a 2-year period. And what I looked at was matching offenders based on LSI-R score, ATSI, all of those things to find like for like. Okay, and the way that I did it was a little bit different to the way Don did it, in that what I would do is find an offender with certain characteristics and then see, well, what's the average for that individual? So somebody that has particular characteristics, if I got a whole bunch of other offenders that were just like that, how often would they reoffend? So to try and sort of make that a little bit more concrete, say we take John, 19-year-old Aboriginal male, who scores 33 on the LSI-R. If I find a whole bunch of other 19-year-old Aboriginal males with a score of 33 on the LSI-R, 45% are likely to return within 12 months. Similarly, Jenny, 47-year-old female scoring 23. If I find a whole bunch of other 47-year-old females scoring 23, on average 18%. So obviously the matching has a little bit of elasticity in it. So it might be I match Jenny to a group of 46, 47 and 48-year-olds, for example. Because obviously we're not going to find the identical. So again, if everyone was like John, 45% would be the rate that we would expect to see returning. If everyone was like Jenny, 18% would be normal. But if we had a mixture, we'd expect that the overall rate would be 31.5%. So what we can do with that is then say, well, in 2013, all of our offenders looked like this. We expect in 2015 that if we apply that same modelling, we can anticipate what the rate of reoffending would be if everything stayed the same and see, well, did we do better than that? We can take it a little bit further. So using the statewide average, we can look at the expected rate of return for each location. We can then look at, for a particular office, was the rate of return higher or lower than what we'd expect, given the demographic of that population there. So this allows comparison between highest and lowest rates of offending compared to the state. So there's a lot of other variables, as you know, the discussion with Don would have sort of identified. So it's not perfect, but nonetheless it gives a broad indication. So the officers with the lowest rate of return compared to the expected rate were, in Metro, Penrith. So if I can get, have I got someone here from Penrith to come up? For regional, Tamworth. So we can do the same thing for the individual. Now, obviously, the smaller it gets, the more problematic this becomes. It's only a general indication, but nonetheless, we took it down to the officer level. So we looked at officers who have managed at least 30 offenders over the same 2-year period. We had a total of 468 officers in the analysis. We tried to focus on officers that had managed for the first 4 weeks, so that we were picking up the intervention at the earlier part of the order rather than whoever was assigned, say, in the second year of supervision. We did also do a little bit of a qualitative analysis around what was going on with that caseload, just to sort of see were the appropriate skills and things being applied as well. So the officers that had the most significant impact on reducing rate of return to custody in each area were, in the north, Jacinta Gall from Taree. So unfortunately, Jacinta's not here, but I believe we've got David Gray is coming to collect the award on her behalf.
Thanks very much.
Okay. In the south, it was Greg Marsden.
Other side.
from Sydney Metro, John Williams. So I think I've got someone collecting on his behalf as well. Yeah. So obviously John's not here, so he's just got a very unique style. So we can do the same thing, same basic principle with other things too. So for example, with the community service work, completion rates for community service work are, as you'd all know, influenced by similar variables. So if you've got a group of low-risk employed offenders, you'd expect that the rate's going to be of completion is going to be higher than if you've got a bunch of high-risk homeless people. So I did a similar match comparison process. Unfortunately, the LSI-R, which is one of the most significant predictors, wasn't available for the majority. So we went and started looking at other factors such as the number of prior contacts, number of prior revocations, and number of prior times in custody, which enable us to build an overall rating that is very similar to the LSI-R. So if any of you have heard of the CRES or the GRAM, it's a very similar process to that, and provides very good predictive validity around anticipating what the completion rate will be. So, officers with the best completion rates for CSO compared to what we would have expected given the population they were working with were in the regions, Inverell. And for Metro, DY. Now, I have to say something about that, sorry. When I first saw that result, I thought, DY, of course, they've got it easy. But, making some assumptions here. But when we compared the rate of completion, which was higher than you would expect, so there is a large proportion of low risk, more stable offenders, but the gap between what was expected to be completed and what was actually completed was substantial. So, yeah, I just have to mention that. Now, lastly, for parole units, because this is really difficult in terms of coming up with ways of trying to assess this for everyone, and I apologise, I know we don't have a pre-sentence report writer award. So the modelling for the parole units, couldn't really think of anything. Number of reports, well, no, that's not really indicative. There's so many complicating factors. So we just rang the parole authority and asked them.
Very scientific.
Yep. I'm allowed to throw science out the window occasionally, aren't I? So we asked them, who can you recommend who consistently delivers high quality work? And we just got one name back from them, which was Cheryl Robinson at Windsor. So I think we've heard a lot about, what we're all here for. Yeah. Sorry, can I have my slide back up? Thank you. I can't remember all this stuff. So it's something that, we've tried to highlight, obviously those who seem to be doing a better than average job, but I think as been mentioned before, it's something that everyone contributes to. We don't get reductions in reoffending from one person doing a brilliant job. We get reductions in reoffending from everyone contributing. So even though, what you do might just be a little, when you add that all up, it turns into a lot. I think one of the things that we need to remember in terms of the work we do, and particularly with the focus on the higher risk offenders, is that even when we do a good job, even when we reduce reoffending, most of them are still going to reoffend. So it's not always about saying, well, we had a brilliant success, we had this person with a 10-year history, chronic drug use, consistent offending, who suddenly went straight. Sometimes it's about, can we keep that person out of custody and offence-free for one more week? Because 1 week's not a lot for one person, but when we have 5,000 offenders that are out for 1 week longer, it makes a big difference overall. I've given you some, you'll see in the handbook, I've sort of done some maths for you in terms of pointing out what that actually translates to. But just as an example, if we keep 5,000 offenders out of custody for 1 week longer, that's 100 inmates at any one time. That's 100 offences over a year. So it adds up. So again, thank you all. Every little bit that you do helps us with the bigger picture. So thank you.